In the last series, we put in the work to build a functional authentication API with Node, Express, and Postgres. We implemented user login and registration routes and stored user data in Postgres. On top of that, we followed best practice around storing sensitive data in environment variables and hashing user passwords with bcrypt. Having done all that hard work, this time around we're going to build off of it and layer in a full-fledged authentication mechanism, which we did not do last time. The goal is to keep users logged in and ensure that user-owned resources are only accessible by the users who created them. We're then going to build a small React front-end responsible for keeping users logged in and letting them interact with our API. So we're going to handle some client-side authentication protocols as well, which we also did not touch on in the last series. So when we're finished, we'll have a working application powered entirely by the Pern stack, which is PostgreSQL, Express, React, and Node. And this will let users create posts showing off their coding setup, and then also lets users rate those setups. So accordingly, we're going to call it Rate My Setup. Now, we're not going to start from scratch on the API side of things since we did so much work in the last series. And instead, we're just going to clone a repo that contains a slightly generalized version of the wedding registration application we built previously. It should already have the user registration and login routes that we created last time, so we'll be building on top of that. So to get to that repo, head to github.com/jastra11 pernstackauth starter and clone that repo locally. It's public, so you should be able to access it. And we're going to rename it, of course, but just click this button right here. It says code, and then look for the HTTPS button. Click that to copy the repo. Head into your terminal and run git clone. Paste in the link we just copied, and let's rename it Rate My Setup API. So I'm going to hit enter. It should clone that repo for us, and then I'm going to cd into that directory. And I am going to remove Git since this Git is attached to the repo that's already in GitHub. So I'm going to run rm-rf.git. And in doing so, it'll remove this Git directory here so that it is no longer storing anything in Git. So we have no version control. And then let's initialize a fresh Git. So do git init. Great. Now let's open up this README and see what's up. So essentially, this is like a nice short explanation of what the repo is, and we can talk about this in a minute, but all that matters is we want to get this dev environment set up. So we're just going to follow these steps briefly. I'm just going to kind of breeze through them, starting with the npm install command. Running that, and let's actually examine what dependencies we're installing while it handles that, even though it did it pretty quickly. All of these look pretty familiar. If you go to the package.json, we see that we have the Express for the API, we have Morgan for logging, we have cores for cross-origin resource sharing, and we have .env, there it is, .env for environment variables. We also you have the same one we used last time, colors, which is just makes pretty colors in the terminal, and then bcrypt for hashing passwords, nodemon or nodemon, I don't really know how people say that, for restarting our dev server or watching our dev files, so that it restarts whenever any of our files change, and then PG, the Node Postgres package for interfacing with Postgres. Now, the next thing we need to do is we need to create some environment variables. And if you look at the README, it says right here, make sure to create a .env file from the .env template by running cp.env template.env. So I'm just going to copy paste that. I'm going to run it. And it should, yeah, it worked. Cool, I have this .env file there. And notice how git ignore is already set up to ignore the .env file. So we're good there. The next thing I'm going to do is I'm going to go into this auth. Actually, let's change the environment variables first. Since I think it's auth started here, yeah, let's change that to rate my setup. Let's also make sure we change that in our .env template. Rate my setup, which means we'll probably want to rename those SQL files as well, actually. So let's just rename them in terminal because I like doing work there. I'm just going to move authstarter.sql to rate my setup.sql. And then I'm going to move the authstarter schema.sql to rate my setup schema, if I can spell that correctly, .sql. So all I did is just rename these files so that they're representative of the actual database we're going to be using. And then inside the rate my, same thing here, just renaming the actual file or the database name itself. So I'm just going there and just copy paste this. Instead of recreating auth starter, I'm going to recreate rate my setup and do the same thing for all of these. And then I'm going to change this to the correct file name, which is rate my setup. I cannot type to rate. There we go. Oh, that's not set up either. Beautiful. And then I'm going to do the same thing here, but just concatenate test onto the end of it. And usually having a test database is a good idea, by the way. It's just one of those things you want to do in case you actually want to run your test against a real database. And so we'll just do the same thing here. We'll just copy this, and it'll set up 2 databases for us. Then we're going to actually run the script so that we have our databases set up. So we'll do psql -f for file, and then the name of the file, which is rat.sql. Beautiful. And if you run that, it'll prompt us, do we want to create that database? I do. Thank you. Hopefully that works. Great. And let's do that again. Oh, I think I already had that database created. Let's try that one more time. Okay, let's try that one more time. Yes, I do. Lovely. Let's try it again. Yes. Great. So now we have our databases created, and let's just make sure that's the case. Just go into psql and connect to rate my setup database, and then just run /d+, and we see the users table just like we expect, because that is what is in our users table here. Fantastic. That's exactly what we want. So it looks like everything is in place. We're ready to go. And let's actually save all of our work to Git for the moment. So we'll do our simple git dance of git status, which should show just about everything here because we initialize a new Git repository. Then we'll do git add. Let's do everything. And git commit. First commit for rate my setup API. And we're good to go.